Okay, so we've got another example here from, oh, I can't remember. I think these guys are like a Finnish news aggregate or international news sharing platform, counterbalance right-wing conservative media establishment. We need each other. Political contents for free. Austrian non-profit Association for the Democratization of Information, with headquarters in Vienna, self-research news and articles from other media. Okay. Donations, advertisements. In order to finance the technical infrastructure, we place ads on our site. It covers the monthly cost of our website server. Okay, cool. Yes, so this Austrian news organization has an article titled "Finland Ends Homelessness and Provides Shelter for All in Need" by Contrast.Austria, and this is from 2020. The social democratic magazine Contrast.at covers current political events both in Austria and the rest of the world. Nice. Cool. Das Social-Demokratische Magazin Kontrast.at beglied mit seinen Weigern. Oh, no, I can't fake it. I feel so insecure trying to read a different language. Like the local side and comedy, social justice perspective. Experts and bloggers and scour international articles and studies. To this end, we are trying to develop a form of collaborative journalism. In the dossier section, we invite readers to contribute information on the topics incorporated into the articles. The SPO Parliamentary Group. Okay. Wow, they're so pale. Even the brown guy's pale. Right, so this article was updated on February 4th, 2024. Read this article in German here. Yeah, I want to see if they list the original author. Kathrin Glösel. Oh yeah, so she was, we saw when we looked at the dossier or whatever for this before. So Kathrin Glösel for Contrast.at, but the Better News has supplied it in English for us with an update as of February 2024. Finland is successfully fighting homelessness despite new political developments. No more homelessness, a goal that sounds like utopian fiction, may become reality soon. The Housing First concept in Finland, supported by NGOs like the Y Foundation, is aiming for the end of homelessness in 2027. In a new interview, Juha Kahila, head of international affairs at the Y Foundation, talks about the implementation of Housing First, new developments in politics, and his hopes for the future. The Housing First project in Finland is still successfully reducing homelessness. Those affected by homelessness receive an apartment and additional support without any preconditions. The result: the number of people without housing is decreasing steadily since the 80s. In 2022, there were 3,686 homeless people in Finland, which is 262 less than in 2021. The aim is to end homelessness in Finland by 2027. We've already reported on this in a previous article. That's the one that I jumped to over here. Yeah, I didn't realize the program had been going on since the 80s. That's cool. So they've really kept it up for a good 40 years and they're on track to have it wrapped up by 50. And yeah, 3,000, I wonder 5.6 million people, and they've got 3,500 homeless. That's, yeah, wow. New developments on Housing First in Finland. A key stakeholder in the Finnish fight against homelessness is the Y Foundation. The NGO has been providing housing for the homeless since 1985. It is now one of the sponsors of the Housing First policy in the country. It organises housing and is the fourth largest landlord in Finland. Today it manages 19,000 apartments throughout Finland. 9,000 of these apartments are specifically for homeless people or people who are about to become homeless. I don't think we were reading about Norway earlier, but I think in Australia this is what's called public housing rather than social housing. So social housing is an umbrella term, but it includes... Is the difference between Australian and social housing distinguishes between housing provided by state bodies, state or federal bodies, and that provided by NGOs. So I guess this would come under... It's either community or public housing, but I feel like the terms are so superficially interchangeable that it's hard to keep track of that. 4 walls can change a life, 4 decades can change a society. Cool. Wow, it's very clean site design, huh? Soft green. Largest national non-profit landlord. We promote social justice by providing affordable rental housing. We're a public benefit and not-for-profit organisation. We own over 19,000 homes in nearly 60 locations. Fairest square footage in the city means that the rents on these homes do not generate a profit. Partners in housing. I just want to see pictures of some of the housing. Never mind, I'm sure it's great. In a recent interview with Juha Kehila, who works as coordinator and lead coordinator of the National Housing First Development Network at the Y Foundation, oh dear, okay, the translation isn't perfect. Juha Kehila talks about the process of Housing First. He gives detailed information about the financial benefits of the housing project and explains the role of the Finnish government in the realization of this concept. A new development is the election of a Conservative government in 2023. That previous article that linked over here was from 2022. Kehila believes that success of Housing First is depending on whether the new government is cutting certain social benefits, but he's still hopeful that the goal of ending homelessness can be achieved. Furthermore, he thinks that organisations and political decision-makers in other countries can be inspired by the project and that this will help the countries greatly in the long term. And we've moved on to the interview portion over here. Contrast At spoke to Juha Kehila about the successful Finnish concept and the Y Foundation. He has been involved in helping the homeless for over 10 years and worked at the Finnish Youth Housing Association Services, NALPA, before becoming its CEO. He later moved to the Y Foundation, where he now works as head of international affairs. You can read the interview in German here. And a photo of Mr. Kehila. Mr. Kehila, what does the process of the allocation of housing look like? How does a person approach you, and how long does it take to get an apartment? First of all, before a person becomes homeless, most people have already tried a lot to prevent this. If someone still loses their apartment, they can consider, together with one of our social workers, what the best housing solution and form of support is. In other words, whether it should be a single apartment with the occasional support or a Housing First unit, i.e. an apartment in a Housing First complex where help is available around the clock. At the moment, we can provide both housing and support very quickly. Only if someone wants to live in a specific Housing First unit, they may have to wait longer for an apartment. But many people want to wait in temporary accommodation anyway, and that is always possible. Social benefits begin to flow immediately. Depending on the person's situation, we also consider appropriate job opportunities. For example, the Housing First units offer low-threshold employment provision themselves. The Y Foundation always works together with other agencies. We provide the housing, support, advice, social services, and other services are then provided by welfare districts and other organisations. Common rooms and even a sauna. this is what the Housing First houses look like. Oh, cool. What do these apartments or houses look like? Are they spread throughout the city? Kahila. The apartments are mainly quite ordinary. 80% of the apartments are scattered around the city. The rest are in Housing First units, each with around 33 to 100 apartments in one building and support services on the ground floor. The apartments are equipped with a fridge, oven, etc. The residents furnish the rest themselves so that they feel at home. In the Housing First units, there are also communal areas where people can cook, watch TV together, or just meet and chat. And here's an example in Espoo, Finland. It looks like you could have taken that picture in Malmgravad, honestly, although it's a bit leafier. It's nice. There are certainly people who say it is unfair that many people have to spend a large part of their income on housing while others simply get it for free. What do you say to them? Kahila. The answer is that housing is a human right. If that's not enough of an argument, we explain that it actually saves money to provide housing in this way, and to avoid people having to sleep in emergency accommodation or on the street. We explain that the city is also safer for everyone if we really take care of everyone. Besides, nothing is given away for free. People pay rent for their apartments. Of course, in the early stages, most of them pay their rent through various social benefits, but a permanent home gives them the chance to contribute more again. You and the Y Foundation say that it is cheaper for the state to provide housing for the homeless than to have them remain in their situation. What does this calculation look like? Kahila. It's true that ending homelessness saves money in the long run. The reason behind this is that people don't have to use expensive emergency services. They spend fewer nights in prison, they less often need police or legal services, and so on. In Finland, we have calculated that the savings are around 15,000 euros per person per year if they get housing instead of being left in shelters or on the streets. Now, euros to AUD. And this was 2024, so he's pretty up to date. 27,500. Yeah, that was very similar to the Australian price. The access to housing, child services and justice services for someone experiencing homelessness before they receive support. Per person per year, yep. Once people have a home and the help that they need, the resources that are needed for the other shelters and services are freed up. In addition, homeless people become taxpayers again in the long run, but we haven't even included that in our calculations. Overall, the effects are in our calculation, so it's likely enough that his organisation does also calculate that, but it's just not brought it into the picture here. Overall, the effects are multifaceted. We studied this in Finland, and there are studies worldwide that show the same result. It is always cheaper to house people with support than to leave them in emergency shelters or on the streets. Before, when I read that Crisis UK thing to you and it referenced the US and Australia, I did had a look for US 10,000 Homes campaign. This is what I looked at in the US. This is probably one of their, certainly one of the, sorry, what habitat I clicked on thing is here. One of the bigger American campaigns that I know of, but it found the same thing. So Ahuri, the Australian Housing and Urban Residential Institute, or what have you, that government set up, showed the same thing. The UK has shown the same thing. We've got Finland's results over here. There would be, I'm sure, plenty of other places that have shown it, but it's just give people a little dignity and give them a I find like a lot of people think that to be an adult you have to have this jaded, cynical view of, oh, people don't really want to work, people don't really want to, they enjoy being, like scummy on the streets and like being everybody's problem. No, like people want to have dignity, they want to feel engaged, they want to contribute and have self-respect and self-esteem, like it's, but if you acknowledge basic fundamental human goodness, then you also have to acknowledge that the circumstances are terrible and more could be done. And people, if you keep them busy and overworking and overproductive and doing 5 days a week for however many stupid hours a day, commuting here and there while they're under mortgage stress, then yeah, how much empathy can you have for someone on the street who you see just lying there looking lazy when in fact, they're exposed, it's humiliating, they're cold and uncomfortable, and like, what are you going to do except conserve energy by lying down? I'm getting off track here. The initiative for Housing First came from the Finnish government. In Finland, there is a lot of political support for the Housing First approach. How did this come about, and who convinced whom? Kahila. The Housing First model was inherently a political decision in Finland. It worked differently here than in many other countries, where organisations and other stakeholders had to explain to politicians why it makes sense. In Finland, politicians had to convince the stakeholders, with carrots and sticks, so to speak. The politicians said, "We want to change the system. If you're on board, we will help you with the renovation of the apartments. If you're not on board, we won't buy the accommodation you provide." So, there has been a gentle push. I don't know what accent I was doing, I'm sorry. However, we currently have a government that wants to cut social benefits and build less affordable housing in the future. That's a conservative one that got in 2023. Of course, this presents us with challenges, but we are not despairing. We are working with the tools we have. I'm not going to look into this, but I'm guessing that part of the reasons that they're going to give cutting social benefits is that we've already reduced the problem significantly. This isn't. I mean, there's been a rightward fascist push across the globe, right? This isn't shocking, but the fact that you've got 40 years of success and you're in the last handful of years to eliminate and then only maintain what you've got is. So many of these people would know and have been around people who benefit from this. It's been working for years. I don't know. So I'm curious to see what the outcome of their negotiations is. It hasn't linked to tragic updates at the start of this article, so I'm optimistic. What about other countries? Do NGOs or political representatives come to you to learn from your experience with Housing First? Kahila. Yes, we get several hundred visitors every year, and many of them are political decision makers, ministers, mayors, and EU decision makers. In addition, many groups come and get inspiration for their own work. Do you know of any comparable international projects? There is currently great work on this in Denmark and Austria, and I believe that this will benefit the countries greatly in the long term. No one should be homeless by 2027. Helsinki wants to achieve this goal by 2025. The Finnish government wants to eliminate homelessness completely by 2027. Will that work out? Kahila. That depends on the decisions of the current government. If not all the cuts are implemented, I firmly believe that it will be possible to end homelessness by the end of 2027. Helsinki has an even more ambitious goal. The city wants to end homelessness by the end of 2025. They also have an excellent program, so this goal can also be achieved. Are there criticisms of Housing First? And if so, from whom? Kahila. Sometimes, yes. Mostly from people who think that Housing First is only about housing and who don't realize that other forms of support are an essential part of the model. Of course, we all need to do a better job in the future to reduce these prejudices. What motivates you personally to work at the Y Foundation? Kahila. The Foundation really wants to change the world and is taking concrete measures to do so. Reducing homelessness worldwide is a goal that I can easily and happily support. We want to do everything we can to ensure that one day everyone has a home. Is there a story of a person that you particularly remember and would like to share? Kahila. I used to be a social worker and worked with a young man for several years. At some point, he no longer needed support and was ready to live independently. This fall, after several years, he suddenly called to let me know that he had become a father and that he really wanted to tell me about it. The thought of that always makes me smile. This work is licensed under Creative Commons. It can be republished for free, either translated or in the original language. In both cases, please cite contrast.at and or Kathrin Glösel as the original source author and set a link to this article. Yeah. Nice. Yeah, good. I mean, it should be like that. And I wish that was the case here. That's the crazy growth in women over 50 who are homeless now is so incredibly miserable, so incredibly demoralizing. Right, I thought an additional article with a new interview on recent events can be found here. So that's what I read. I thought that it was an update to this article that I originally planned to read, but it turns out it's it's two. They updated this article and there's an additional article. So I'll read this because I think this goes more into the details of how this all works. And man, this is such a different color scheme from any Australian city. That's so strange to me. Finland ends homelessness and provides shelter for all in need. Originally written in 2020, it was updated in 2024. Finland is the only country in Europe where homelessness is in decline. In 2008, you could see tent villages and huts standing between trees in the parks of Helsinki. Homeless people had built makeshift homes in the middle of Finland's capital city. They were exposed to harsh weather conditions. Since the 1980s, Finnish governments had been trying to reduce homelessness. Short-term shelters were built. However, long-term homeless people were still left out. There were too few emergency shelters, and many affected people did not manage to get out of homelessness. They couldn't find jobs without a housing address. And without any job, they couldn't find a flat. It was a vicious circle. This is a sort of loop that a lot of people... I hear about a lot of Americans winding in this as well. I don't know if this is a problem we have in Australia, but I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, that's how we avoided bringing those Afghan translators over, as I recall, was that you gave them like Centrelink forms, and you have to put in an address for those forms, and you know, it's a second language. They can struggle to read that, and it's deliberately overly bureaucratized. Surely we've just get a postal address. Like, yeah, I'll pick the stuff up from this or that post office with my ID. Just whatever. And without any job, they couldn't find a flat. It was a vicious circle. Furthermore, they had problems applying for social benefits. All in all, homeless people found themselves trapped. But in 2008, the Finnish government introduced a new policy for the homeless. It started implementing the housing first concept. Since then, the number of people affected has fallen sharply. I thought they said that it had been going on since 1980 and that they'd been doing... Oh, the Y Foundation started in the 80s. Okay. And a bit short of... Oh my god, so Finland, as of 2025... Is that the time that interview... Wait, no, that's not what I want. Damn, my reading comprehension is incredibly low, so let's... 2024, so they had that interview, the Conservative government had just come in, but at that time they were talking about wrapping up as of 2025. And the number of people without housing has been decreasing steadily since the 80s anyway, so that's another reference to the 80s. But the Housing First project actually came about in 2008. So in the span of about 20 years, they could have homelessness eradicated by 2027 if they stay on track. But the Finnish government first started trying to reduce homelessness in the 1980s. They were reducing homelessness, but they still had problems. And then when in 2008 they introduced the housing first concept, a lot of success. The number of people affected has fallen sharply. Finland has set itself a target. Nobody should have to live on the streets. Every citizen should have a residence. And the country is successful. It is the only EU country where the number of homeless people is declining. As of 2020 when this was written. Housing first, how everyone is given residence in Finland. It is NGOs such as the Y Foundation that provide housing for people in need. They take care of the construction themselves, buy flats on the private housing market, and renovate existing flats. The apartments have 1 to 2 rooms. In addition to that, former emergency shelters have been converted into apartments in order to offer long-term housing. It was clear to everyone that the old system wasn't working. We needed radical change. So Juha Kakinen. They translated it's Juha again, but Kakinen, director of the Y Foundation, not Kahila is how they translated it over here. English, Finnish. Professor at Tampere University, Finland's national program to do. So I guess Juha is just a Juha is just a kind of common first name, and their last names both start with K, and they both work at the Y Foundation, so I got all mixed up. Anyway, the old guy says, it was clear to everyone that the old system wasn't working. We needed radical change. Homeless people turn into tenants with a tenancy agreement. They also have to pay rent and operating costs. Social workers who have offices in the residential buildings help with financial issues such as applications for social benefits. Juha Kakinen is the head of the Y Foundation. The NGO receives discounted loans from the state to buy housing. Additionally, social workers caring for the homeless and future tenants are paid by the state. The Finnish lottery, on the other hand, supports the NGO when it buys apartments on the private housing market. The Y Foundation also receives regular loans from banks. The NGO later uses the rental income to repay the loans. We had to get rid of the night shelters and the short-term hostels we still had back then. They had a very long history in Finland, and everybody could see they were not getting people out of homelessness. We decided to reverse the assumptions. That's Juha Kakinen, director of the Y Foundation again. So that's how the Housing First concept works. The policy applied in Finland is called Housing First. It reverses conventional homelessness aid. More commonly, those affected are expected to look for a job and free themselves from their psychological problems or addictions. Only then they get help in finding accommodation. So when it says more commonly, it's talking about conventional homeless aid, which is people are expected to look for a job and to stop being sick or psychologically troubled or addicted before they get help in finding accommodation. That's a conventional approach. Housing First, on the other hand, reverses the path. Homeless people get a flat without any preconditions. Social workers help them with applications for social benefits and are available for counselling in general. In such a new, secure situation, it is easier for those affected to find a job and take care of their physical and mental health. The results are impressive. 4 out of 5 homeless people will be able to keep their flat for a long time with Housing First and lead a more stable life. In the last 10 years, the Housing First program provided 4,600 homes in Finland. While in 2017 there was still about 1,900 people living on the streets, the program could reduce this number to less than 1,000 long-term homeless by 2019. But there were enough places for them in emergency shelters so that they at least didn't have to sleep outside anymore. I think in that other article it was saying that the number had reduced in 2022 from 2021, but the number was like 3,000. I'm guessing that this has to do with COVID, but let's see. Yeah, in 2022 there were 3,600 homeless people in Finland, whereas it says in 2017 there were 1,900 people living on the streets. Now that doesn't mean that there were that few homeless people. It could mean that people living on the streets as a subset of homeless people. And there's a link here to what looks like a government document on homelessness. Is it government? Center for State Subsidized Housing Construction. So, a little bit confused about what's happening there, but yeah, so there's either they had a rise in homelessness due to COVID, or the numbers they're giving here are just those living the roughest. But in either way, this program could reduce the number to less than 1,000 long-term homeless by 2019. Except there were enough places for them in emergency shelters so that they at least didn't have to sleep outside anymore. So that's talking about in the last 10 years, and this was published 2020? 2020. Okay, so COVID should have been affecting these guys at the time. I'm just confused about the numbers they chose to share and the way that they're framing those numbers. It's a little hard for me to wrap my head around exactly how that's going. providing people with an apartment is cheaper than leaving them on the street. Creating housing for people costs money. In the past 10 years, €270 million were spent on construction, purchase and renovation of housing as part of the Housing First program. However, youuu points out this is far less than the cost of homelessness itself, because when people are in emergency situations, emergencies are more frequent. Assaults, injuries, breakdowns. The police, healthcare and justice systems are often called upon to step in, and that also costs money. In comparison, Housing First is cheaper than accepting homelessness. Now the state spends €15,000 less per year per homeless person than before. Furthermore, Y Foundation coordinator youuu points out in a recent interview that the financial benefits might be even higher. Not only are resources for shelters and services freed up once a homeless person receives permanent accommodation, people who were previously homeless become taxpayers again in the long term and can thus contribute to the system themselves. No miracle cure, but a high success rate. With 4 out of 5 people keeping their flats, Housing First is effective on the long run. In 20% of cases, most people move out because they prefer to stay with friends or relatives, or because they don't manage to pay the rent. But even in this case, they are not dropped. They can apply again for an apartment and are supported again if they wish. Of course, there is no guarantee for success. Especially homeless women are more difficult to reach. They conceal their emergency situation more often. They live on the streets less frequently and rather stay with friends or acquaintances. Oh, that's the end of the article. Yeah, contrast.at, and that was Kathrin Glösel again. Cool.